The top 25 coaches poll is on the streets for debate and discussion and much scrutiny. We bring in Joe Lisi of GoForThe2.com. Joe, we've been making some great conversation off camera about the new top 25 and college football coming up in just about 4 weeks. Your initial thoughts about the top 25 here. Thanks for joining us, first of all, but your thoughts about the top 25.
Well, I think the coaches got it right. Florida State, the defending national champions. Alabama, I'm not so sure about Alabama being number 2, but I think the coaches did get it right with Florida State. Jameis Winston, veteran offensive line. I like Florida State being in the top 5. They have a very legitimate shot to defend their national championship.
I put a poll question on my Twitter feed today. We do that each day. Is Oklahoma at number 3 overrated? I'll give you my take, Joe.
Sure.
This team was a decent team last year. They were top 15, top 20 most of the season. But Baylor blew them out. Oklahoma could not gain a yard in that game. They lost another football game to a Texas team that was really down and made Oklahoma look bad. They finished with a flurry. They won a game against Oklahoma State with smoke and mirrors. They got outgained. They got outplayed. They made some special teams plays, punt returns late to pull it out. Then they play the game of their lives out of their minds against Alabama. They come in at number 3, and I think Oklahoma's really good, so I don't want Sooners fans jumping all over me. I think they're good, but I don't know if they're number 3 good, Joe.
I think the number 3 ranking is basically based off of last year's Sugar Bowl. When you look at it, this defense in the early part of the season dominated. First 3-4 ball games, in my opinion, last year, I thought they had one of the top defenses in the country. They played very well on the road against Notre Dame, but then you're right, in the middle of the season, especially against run support in the game against Baylor, did not look very good. They got better as the season wore on, and in that Sugar Bowl, not a very solid, they gave up 30-plus points, but it was the offense that really took control with redshirt freshman quarterback Trevor Knight, and I think that's why you see the number 3 ranking. Beating Alabama in the Sugar Bowl gives a lot of credibility to that program. Are they overrated at number 3? We'll have to see. I really want to see how they play the first month of the season, but right now I think it's a legitimate ranking based off the Sugar Bowl last year.
And one more note on Alabama for me, Joe, is I wish they would play somebody out of conference. West Virginia went 2-7, and I know SEC backers are going to say the schedule's tough enough in the SEC. Well, that aside, we're judging for a college football playoff, which you can only specifically judge teams if they play out of their conference, because that's what the judgment is. So I got an issue with the West Virginia game being their toughest non-conference game. And number 2, and this is no fault of Alabama, this is just the way it shakes out in the SEC, they don't play any of the better teams in the other division. No Georgia, no South Carolina, no Florida, no Missouri for Alabama. So they get off pretty lightly there.
Right.
Week 2, we got a game between Oregon and Michigan State, Joe, that should set some things up. You got Oregon starting at number 4, Michigan State at 8.
Right. Okay, I'll address the Alabama issue with you. I'm a little bit in agreement with you, and I don't want Bama fans to jump all over me because I was all for A.J. McCarron prior to the Iron Bowl loss for him to win the Heisman Trophy last year. If they could have pulled out that victory, gotten back to the SEC championship game, in my opinion, I thought A.J. McCarron should have won the Heisman Trophy. We know what happened in the Iron Bowl, but a very solid year by A.J. McCarron, not given enough credit for what he did on the football field. The one thing that A.J. McCarron did in big ball games, Mark, he did not turn the ball over. You could look at 3 ball games last year on the road against Texas A&M, 20 of 29, 4 touchdowns, no INTs. At home against LSU, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. In the Iron Bowl, 2 touchdowns, no INTs. Alabama is going to miss his leadership. They're going to miss his big play ability, and I'm not so sure with either Blake Sims or Jacob Coker and new offensive coordinator Lane Kiffin if everything's just going to fall into place week 1 of the season. Now, I know West Virginia, 2-7 like you mentioned, but I like the offensive talent by the Mountaineers. Dana Holgerson's on the hot seat. I think they can give Alabama all they can handle week 1. Now, you're right about their schedule. Alabama not facing a lot of the teams in the East, but they do have to play LSU, which is a very tough team defensively. So we'll see how it plays out. It's the first year that Nick Saban's going in with a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback in the same season. So we'll keep that. I think they're a little high at number 2. I think they should be in the area of number 6 or number 7. So we'll see how the first couple of games play out for Alabama. But in my opinion, I'm in agreement with you. When you talk about Oregon at number 4, again, until they can win an ugly ball game via, like last year against Stanford, I don't like Oregon at number 4. I like them a little bit like 9, 10 in there. Until they can show me that if they can't rely on their offense and have to play a game total defensively like they had to against Stanford, I don't like them as high as number 4. They're going to get their opportunity in Autzen Stadium, in my opinion, against the best team in the Big Ten, and that's Michigan State. If they can prove to me that they can win that style of ball game week number 2, then I'll change my opinion. But I think, in my opinion, Michigan State should be higher than Oregon at this point.
I'm with you, Joe. I think everybody gets fooled by the flash of Oregon. They're a very talented team, always can fool people in space and make people look silly. There's no doubt about that. But if you look at the track record over the last 5 years, when they have to gut it out against a really strong team that has NFL players, Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, LSU in an opener, Stanford 3 times now, and there's been a few other instances, they get exposed. But I'm amazed at the people that I am in contact with. Always late in the season, they're like, man, I wish we could see Florida State play Oregon, or wish we could see Alabama play Oregon. They're always fooled by the smoke and mirrors. And I'm not discrediting the talent. It's there, but maybe not quite to the extent that we think it is.
Well, we've seen it. I mean, we've seen Oregon play LSU with solid defensive linemen that can run and can really expose the gap integrity, so to speak, of the spread offense. When the whole spread, is all predicated off of space. When they face teams that have very physical defensive lines, like LSU a few years ago, like Stanford, where they actually punch them in the mouth, so to speak, Oregon struggles from an offensive line perspective until they can win a very gutty ball game where they have to rely on a ball control attack and a defense that dominates. I think they're more in the 8 or 9 ranking as opposed to number 4 to start the season. So we'll see how it plays out, though, against Michigan State. Should be a great ball game.
Yeah, Joe, you mentioned Michigan State. You allude to the Big Ten. You think the Spartans are the best team in the Big Ten. So we go with the Buckeyes at number 6 to start the season, the Spartans at 8. Your thought about Michigan State versus Ohio State?
My opinion about both of those teams are they're the creme de la creme of the Big Ten right now. I think they both are the 2 best teams. When you go 24-0 like Urban Meyer did at Ohio State, you're doing something right. Now, I know they didn't win it with a lot of flash. They gutted out ball games, but that's a testament to the character of the teams that he had. They were very blue-collar orientated teams, and that's what Ohio State stands for. The problem is when they got to the Big Ten championship last year, they faced a better team, in my opinion, on the offense and defensive lines in Michigan State. When you look at what Mark D'Antonio has done, over the last 4 years, Mark, the scoring defense has gone down year after year after year, and he's building a program there. I know he loses a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. Only 5 starters return, but he's a defensive-minded coach. He'll have players to step up. I like his schemes. I think Michigan State is the best team in the conference. You look at, they have a very solid quarterback in Connor Cook, and what they were able to do in the Rose Bowl last year against Stanford, in my opinion, very dominating victory. They deserve to be ranked higher than Ohio State entering the 2014 season.
Yeah, it's a good point right there. Connor Cook was a kind of a pedestrian quarterback most of the season. He beat out Andrew Maxwell early, but late in the season, not just the Ohio State championship game and the Stanford Rose Bowl game, but before that, he started to open up the offense. They gave him the keys a little bit more, and he proved what he can do. Michigan State's got Langford back at running back. They've got all their wide receivers, excluding one that produced last season. And Connor Cook, again, went from game manager to a guy that would throw the ball downfield, and he beat up Ohio State and Stanford for over 300 yards per game. So Michigan State, man, if they add that element for a full season to their offense to complement the defense, look out. I think the Ohio State situation, Joe, is basically The name wows people. Ohio State, they're better,
Right.
going to be better than Michigan State. People just assume that. Number
Right.
two, it's the Urban Meyer Braxton Miller combination that, again, people look in the trenches. Urban Meyer made a comment at Big Ten Media Days the other day. He's a little concerned about this offensive line. They lost 4 starters, and he doesn't think their replacements are showing at this point that they
Right.
can grasp the offense and that they're showing what he needs to see. The other thing that's just amazing about Michigan State and D'Antonio, as you well know, Joe, is if you look at the recruiting classes, Ohio State's always in the top 5. Michigan State's always around 35 or 40. And if you
Right.
go position by position, Ohio State's bringing in top 5, top 10 players at each position. Michigan
Right.
State, like Jeremy Langford, was like the 90th rated running back coming out of high school. It's amazing what D'Antonio does with that team.
It is, and it's sort of the same type of recipe that Jim Harbaugh and Shaw did with Stanford, not getting the top 5 talent, but it's what they do with that talent when they come in as freshmen to the time that they turn seniors. That's what coaching is, not just getting top 5 recruiting talent, but it's cultivating that talent over the course of 4 years to where they become better football players year after year after year, and that's a testament to a solid head coach. So that's why I like Dan Antonio, very blue-collar style type of coach, very emotional, not afraid to take chances. He's made some decisions in the punting game and the kicking game that has won some ball games over the years. So he takes his chances, but he also knows what he has, and that's a very solid and physical offense and defensive lines, and that's how he's built his program.
So everybody in the Big Ten's pointing toward Ohio State's trip to Michigan State November 8th. I hate to lay it all on the entire conference on one game, but it looks like it right now, and then they'll have to play a championship game against Wisconsin, Nebraska, or Iowa at this point. Joe, right. UCLA seems to be the chic pick. Everybody I talk to just loves UCLA to be the sleeper, the breakout team, and they start the season at number 7.
I like UCLA. There's a couple of reasons why. I do like Brett Hundley at the quarterback position, Miles Jack at linebacker, and what he did in the running game last year, you can't take away from that. And then they have 8 starters back on offense and defense, so that leads to everybody liking UCLA. And then their dominating performance in the Sun Bowl over Virginia Tech, that just adds to it. Virginia Tech, a very solid team, not great, but a very solid and physical team, and they just basically ran all over them in the Sun Bowl. They have a very athletic quarterback, and then what Jim Moore has done defensively, changed that whole mindset around from what UCLA normally was. UCLA, you think finesse on offense and a finesse bend but don't break type of defense. Well, he's changed that mentality. They're physical now. They get to the quarterback and they have speed on the edge, and I think that that's why people like UCLA in the Pac-12. I like them as well. I think they deserve that ranking at number 7. We'll have to see how the season plays out, but they have some tough ball games in the middle part of their schedule, but I think they deserve to start the season at number 7.
UCLA was always a mystery to me as why somebody couldn't go in there and win with the beautiful weather and the name and everything they've got going for them. But finally, Mora comes in there. He completely changes the culture for a big-time college football program, Joe. It was always amazing to me that they just didn't seem physical. They got pushed around. It was almost like they didn't take it that seriously. Mora comes in and completely sets down the NFL attitude. This is business, boys. We're taking you to boot camp, and you're going to have to tough up. It's impressive.
It's sort of been like the MO, right, Mark? Even since Bob Toledo was there in the late 90s, they had always a very potent offensive attack with a very bend but don't type of break defense, and now you're seeing a different type of style. When Carl Dorrell was there, they really didn't have the offensive pieces in place to really score, but now you're seeing a different type of animal with Jim Mora, NFL experience coming in, and he really changed that program around in a short period of time, and I think he's a very, very solid head coach, and you have to give him a lot of credit for what he was able to do. Really took the spotlight away from USC over the last couple of years, and now they're the front runner in the Pac-12.
And when you take a guy with an NFL mind on the sideline in terms of strategy and combine that with a guy that can connect with young kids and recruits as well as he does, wow, that's dangerous. Right,
it is. It is a very, very strong program that he's building out there.
So, Joe, we got South Carolina at number 9. I'm going to combo them with Georgia at number 12. They seem to be the picks for the SEC East to face an Alabama or Auburn or LSU. Take your pick in the SEC championship game.
Well, I'll start with South Carolina first. 3 straight years, 11 wins back to back in 3 straight years. Great job by the old ball coach. They lose Connor Shaw, who was a very mobile quarterback. They lose Bruce Ellington, and of course they lose Jadeveon Clowney. So 3 big pieces of the puzzle. Dylan Thompson takes over, more of a conventional pocket passer. They have Mike Davis, who in my opinion, second best back in the conference next to Todd Gurley, but they do have a veteran offensive line. However, when you look at the defense, 6 sophomores going to start on that defense. I'm a little subject. I don't think South Carolina is as high. I think they're right where they should be in terms of 9 or 10. I have them at number 10. I don't see them winning the SEC East, though. I don't want Gamecock fans to get all over me. I just don't think that they'll realize what Connor Shaw meant to the offense. When you look at that offensive line, they only surrendered 23 sacks last year, but Connor Shaw made a lot of plays with his feet. He also made a lot of plays out of the pocket. You could look at that Missouri game last year where Dylan Thompson took the reins. They were down 17-0 on the road in Columbia. Connor Shaw came off the bench, led that victory in one of the best games in the SEC last year. They're going to miss his experience and his decision-making, and I think that that's where Gamecock fans will realize it in the middle of the season. When you look at Georgia, Mark, I'm going out on a limb. I've already said this in an article. I wrote it. I like Georgia to win the national championship. I like it because of the way their schedule sets up, and I say that today with the news of Malcolm Mitchell having arthroscopic knee surgery. They said he's going to make a full recovery, but we're not sure about his return in terms of the timetable. But when you look at Georgia right now, Jeremy Pruitt, the defensive coordinator, comes over from Florida State. That is a huge, huge plus where Todd Grantham goes to Louisville. So I think Georgia will benefit from that. But when you look at the offensive talent by the Georgia Bulldogs, they have Keith Marshall, Todd Gurley, Nick Chubb, who's a freshman, and Sonny Michael coming in, Brendan Douglas, that offensive line, and the wide receivers, Michael Bennett, Justin Scott Wesley has a 1-game suspension, but Chris Connolly comes back too. So a lot of weapons surrounding fifth-year senior quarterback Hudson Mason, who got his feet wet and got very good game experience last year when Aaron Murray went down against Kentucky. He led the victory on the road against Georgia Tech, and he got extra practice preparation in the Gator Bowl practice in January 1st. They didn't pull off that victory against Nebraska, but if Hudson Mason wasn't able to step in last year, I wouldn't be calling for the Bulldogs to have a run at the title. But when you look at their schedule, 2 games, Clemson, South Carolina, just like last year, are going to make or break the schedule. Clemson coming into Sanford Stadium with a new quarterback, no Sammy Watkins, no Taj Boyd, no Roderick McDowell. I like Georgia in that game. Then they go to Columbia, South Carolina to face the Gamecocks. Now, they lost 2 straight since 2009. History says that the Bulldogs don't usually play well in South Carolina, but if you watch that game last year in Sanford Stadium, that Georgia offensive line in the victory really wore down Jadeveon Clowney and the Gamecock front 7. They held the ball for 8 minutes in terms of running out that clock. So I liked what I saw last year, and I liked the offensive talent. And on top of that, after the first 2 ball games, which I think Georgia can get by, they have a very good chance to beat Clemson and South Carolina. There's really not a team, in my opinion, that's going to challenge Georgia's secondary. Trey Matthews is out. Josh Harvey-Clemens is out. They both kicked off the team. So Georgia has problems in terms of the secondary, but what team is really going to stretch the field vertically? Missouri loses LaDamian Washington and Dorial Green-Beckham. Matty Mott's only a sophomore. Tennessee, Justin Worley comes back. There's really not a team on their schedule except Auburn, which I think is the swing game, to challenge Georgia vertically, and that's why I picked Georgia to win the national championship.
Joe, we'll never know what might have been. I think this was the biggest travesty in college football last year in regards to just seeing injuries ravage a team. It was Georgia.
Right.
They lost their wide receiver core. Gurley was never the same. He got hurt against LSU. He came back, but he was not right. They lost his backup, Keith Marshall, who's an exceptional back. It just they didn't have their, Aaron Murray's thrown to like fifth-year seniors who never caught a pass late in that
Right.
season. It's probably a blessing in disguise at the time that Murray goes down. Hudson Mason does get that valuable experience you talked about, pulled off the
Right.
game against Georgia Tech, threw for over 300 yards against Nebraska in the bowl game. South Carolina, I think you make a great point about the front seven being ravaged by departures with Clowney and Chas Sutton. Kelsey Quarles gone. I've got a blogger, South Carolina SB Nation guy, who comes on and he says, man, we are looking for defensive backs. We don't know. We don't have scholarship defensive backs. They've got a couple four-star corners but to rely on freshmen is a bit dicey. Fortunately, Manziel, Mettenberger, McCarron, on and on, James Franklin gone. So, yeah, the quarterback situation in the SEC is a bit shaky. It's not nearly what it was last season. So, yeah, as you mentioned, huge game, South Carolina, Georgia, probably the swing game in the SEC East early on. Baylor, Oklahoma. Of course, the Bears embarrassed Oklahoma in Waco last season. They score a zillion points. Bryce Petty back at quarterback. Unfortunately, another one of these teams that doesn't like to schedule anybody non-conference, and it drives me crazy. I want to see Baylor and Oregon play. I want to see Baylor and Michigan State play. Somebody. But anyway, Baylor, the outlook here is they start at number 10.
I think that's high for them. And the reason why is when you look at Baylor's run last year, prior to Oklahoma, they didn't beat a top 25 team prior to that game. So let's take that for what it's worth. Oklahoma, we just spoke before, they did have some defensive issues in the middle of their season, and Baylor really caught them at just the right time. But that was their first win over a top 25 team. They then get that victory, followed up by an Oklahoma State blowout in Stillwater, and then followed by a really tough loss to UCF in the Fiesta Bowl. When you look at their defense, really struggled against sophisticated passing attacks. Blake Bortles, who had 4 great wide receivers there last year, tore up that Baylor Bear defense, and then Mike Gundy and that offensive staff really ran away at home against Baylor. So their defense really didn't step up against good passing teams, and that's why I think they're a little bit overrated. I have them a little bit lower at 14 or 15. I know Bryce Petty comes back. Shaq Linwood, the running back, filling in for Seastrunk. They have a lot of offensive talent, and I think Art Briles is doing a great job. I just think they're a little high at number 10, in my opinion.
Joe, at this point, Stanford's kind of an elite program. Who would have thought it 5 years ago? But Pac-12 champion again, always in the mix, always seems to be. Now it's the new rivalry in the Pac-12 that seems to decide it, the Oregon-Stanford game, because now that UCLA is stepping up and maybe USC and Arizona State, maybe we'll have a competitive Pac-12 championship game finally. But your thoughts about the Cardinal losing quite a bit on defense?
Well, I think that they always reload, and like I said, what Dan Antonio does is that David Shaw builds the talent and coaches the talent up. So I think that they'll have a very solid defense. Again, it might take them a couple of weeks to get acclimated, but they're a blue-collar team and a blue-collar mentality. Kevin Hogan at the quarterback position, solid. He's a winner, and as long as you have Ty Montgomery on the outside and in the kicking game, Stanford has an opportunity to win ball games. The one concern that I have, not just defensively, but they have 2 sophomores that are going to be starting on the offensive line. Not a lot of game experience, so I think Stanford's right where they should be, in my opinion. I just don't know if they're going to have a run like they've had over the last couple of years under David Shaw because of the inexperience on the offensive line and what you mentioned, the losses on defense. I think it might take them a while to get acclimated and get that game experience, but a solid team nonetheless. I just think that they're not going to have as much success as they had over the last couple of years.
We mentioned LSU. They're at 13. They take on Wisconsin in week 1. That's the game I got to see week 1, Joe. If I only see one college football game, which I expect to watch about 8, but if I only can watch one, it's LSU and Wisconsin. So Tigers at 13, Badgers at 14, and LSU, if this is possible, flying under the radar this year.
It's possible because when you look at what Les Miles has done with that team, I mean, 2 years ago they lost 11 players to the NFL, mostly on defense. Eric Reed, Mike Minter, Kevin Minter, the linebacker, they were emotional leaders of that defense. They come back this year, and now they lose their starting quarterback, Zach Mettenberger, Jeremy Hill, the running back, and 2 of their biggest play wide receivers in Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. Now, Mettenberger, he did get hurt. Jennings stepped in the win against Arkansas, got the game experience experience in the victory over Iowa in the Capital One Bowl, so that was very important leading up into the season. They really haven't named the starter, but in my opinion, I think it'll be Jennings, very athletic. I don't think they'll miss Hill in any way, shape, or form. They have Terrence McGee coming back and Kenny Hilliard, two solid backs, and then they have the number one running back in the land in Leonard Fournette. I had Justin Vincent on my show who said he's a man, and Justin Vincent should know 2003 Sugar Bowl BCS champion MVP. Said he's a man. So I don't think they'll miss that talent in terms of the quarterback position as much because Jennings can make plays with his feet and what Fournette and McGee and Hilliard can do at the running back position. What I feel LSU is going to miss is the two big play wide receivers in Landry and Beckham Jr. When you look at their production, they were 70% of Zach Mettenberger's completions, yards, and touchdowns last year. It's so hard to just replace two big play wide receivers like that. I think they can fly under the radar, but it's going to be very, very difficult for them to get to an SEC championship just because of the lack of inexperience on offense. But they have Cam Cameron as an offensive coordinator. I think he'll cultivate that talent. And John Chavis, a great defensive coordinator. But when you lose that much talent, it takes some time to get going and understand the system. And I think 13 is right where they should be, to be honest with you.
Yeah, everybody's looking for Malachi Dupree to step into that one of those two wide receiver roles. He's a true freshman. He's going to be special, but at the same time, I think you nailed it. Two of the best wide receivers in the country gone. A great running back. I think you're on point with the LSU production at running back. Jeremy Hill, the best of the bunch, but really missed. Probably not. Quarterback needs to perform. The defense should be outstanding. 10-2, 9-3, I would guess for the Tigers here. In 2014. We got Wisconsin, and I'm going to just go off here for a second, Joe, and bear with me because this is what drives me crazy about conference expansion. So in the ACC, the SEC, and the Big Ten, you've got 14 teams now. They only play 8 conference games. That means they miss 5 teams, and they're usually very key teams. So for Wisconsin, they're not playing Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, or Penn State.
I know.
And then they've got competition with Iowa and with Nebraska that do have to play some of those teams. So it's a huge advantage for the Badgers.
Right. I still think they're the third best team in the Big Ten. I know some people have them as a legitimate dark horse candidate. The NFL scouts love Melvin Gordon. The problem that I have with Wisconsin is I'm not sold on Joel Stavy at the quarterback position. He really hasn't had to win ball games on his own, and they're going to face some teams down there in their schedule or down the road in the Big Ten. It just happens where they're going to have to pull a game out, and they're going to be challenged, obviously, week 1 against LSU with a very solid defensive front that's going to probably shut down or at least prioritize the running game for Wisconsin. So they're going to need Joel Stavy to step up and make plays, and I'm not sold on what his body of work up until this point. So I think that they're a legitimate top 15 team. They are right where they should be, but I don't see them making a run as many people think. I think they have about 3 losses on the schedule. I just not sold on the offensive quarterback play by Stavy, and I still think they're the third best team in the Big Ten.
I agree. They only bring back 9 starters. That's the lowest total in the Big Ten, Joe. And if you watch the Capital One Bowl against South Carolina last year, they were throwing the ball in the end zone the last 5 minutes down a score. They could have beat South Carolina, but Connor Shaw barely let the ball hit the ground. And just to bring up one stat that I still think is amazing, and we talked about the conversion from Shaw to Dylan Thompson. 24 touchdowns, 1 pick for Connor Shaw last year. He was just very underrated, and if Wisconsin would have gotten something similar to that in that game with Stavy, they beat South Carolina because they ran the ball down their throats. Well, we got USC at 15, the Trojans again in the shadow of UCLA. Who would have ever thought that? So do you like the Trojans at 15?
I like the Trojans with their new head coach, Steve Sarkisian. I think he's the right guy for the job. When you look at what Sarkisian has done, his body of work at Washington, very underrated, turning around that program. He took over a winless team when he took over. So he's done a great job in terms of Washington. Comes to USC, his alma mater, who's the offensive coordinator there with Lane Kiffin. But Kiffin got a lot more credit than Sarkisian did, it seems like, by getting more head coaching opportunities in the NFL. People love Lane Kiffin, but I like Steve Sarkisian. They have a very tough schedule, though, Mark. When you look at their first 3 bowl games, they open up Fresno State is no joke to start the season. They have a 3-game stretch in September that's really going to challenge them. And then their last 2 games to end the year against Notre Dame and UCLA are tough. They really have like a very tough schedule. I think when I looked at it, 6 games really stood out. Arizona State's no joke in the Pac-12. Taylor Kelly, a very solid quarterback. They only have 2 defensive starters coming back, but Arizona State's a team that can challenge, and it's going to take a while. Again, a new coach comes in. It's not like you could just plug the pieces in place and the players play. It's understanding schemes, systems. I think Sarkisian will turn around that program back to an elite program, but it's going to take a year or 2. I think you could see 3 possible losses by USC this year. A very tough schedule, in my opinion. They deserve to be right around 15, though.
And a little bit of a transition from a pro-style offense to Sark wants to spread it out, up-tempo offense.
Right.
Defensively, they've got stars at every level. They've got stars, but I think what they're still suffering from are the scholarship reductions, which hurt you on special teams. It hurts you in the trenches.
Right.
And the depth. So if they have some injuries, they could take a hit there. No Taj Boyd, Martavis Bryant, Sammy Watkins. You mentioned Rod McDowell. Clemson, probably still the second-best team in the ACC.
Yes, I like Clemson. They play 2 games that are really going to be tough at Georgia and at FSU, but they do have a very solid defense. Brett Venables, the former defensive coordinator at Oklahoma, really turned around the defense. You saw what they were able to do against Ohio State. They speed on the edge, and I like Clemson. Problem is, they really starting the year with a new quarterback. Going on the road to Sanford Stadium is going to be a very tough task. And then traveling to Florida State, we saw what happened at home in Death Valley last year, a lot of turnovers. I still think they are their second-best team in the ACC, led by their defense. I like Vic Beasley off the edge, and I like the defense. They create turnovers. But when you have a new quarterback, it's probably going to be Colt Stout on the road, first game of the year, and then traveling to FSU. It's a very tough task for Clemson, but I think there's a possibility they can get back to a solid bowl, and they are the second-best team in the ACC this year.
Sounds like you're in line with me, Joe, on the ACC. Florida State might win back-to-back, but it thins out considerably after that. It's a thin ACC.
It is.
Then we got Notre Dame at, let's see, they're number 17. The Irish have a very difficult schedule, but they do get Everett Golson back after missing 1 season.
Well, there's a couple of things about Brian Kelly, what he's done. A lot of people, I'm not sure they're aware, but field turf now at Notre Dame Stadium to start the year. So we get rid of the traditional grass that we've known in South Bend, and now we go to the more traditional field turf. So I was in shock that the university did that. I've talked to former players such as Tim Brown and former players such as Corey Minor, and they say it's all about uniforms, and it's all about having the best stadium now. So they have to keep up in terms of recruiting. When you look at this team, though, very tough schedule, and I'm not so sure that they have the pieces in place on the defensive side of the ball to challenge some of the teams on their schedule. I think it's a very tough schedule for Notre Dame. Everett Golson does come back, but again, didn't play in the system last year. Coming back now, he's going to have to come back, get his feet wet, get acclimated in terms of making reads and making throws. And I think that they'll struggle early on in terms of getting that timing in the passing game, and even in terms of spreading the ball out in the running game. So I don't think it's going to be as easy as people think just because he's back on campus and a very difficult schedule. They play a lot of tough teams. I think they're more in the area of number 22 or 23. I think they're a little bit inflated at 17 because they are Notre Dame. I think they're going to need everything to fall into place for a miracle run, though.
You touched on Arizona State at 18. For me, Joe, these 2 teams, Ole Miss and Mississippi State, not just because they're a couple hours away from each other, but they're difficult to separate from me. They have 2 of the veteran quarterbacks coming back in the SEC in Bo Wallace and Dak Prescott. Mississippi State outside the top 25 to start the season. Ole Miss has that date with Boise State, which is going to be a challenge in Atlanta to start the season. Ole Miss had that remarkable 2013 recruiting class, and those kids really stepped up.
Right.
LaQuan Treadwell had 72 receptions. Laramie Tunzel at left tackle. Robert Kemdichi. Do you like the Rebels?
I do like the Rebels, but the one thing that they've struggled with, and you mentioned it, is inconsistency. They seem to win games they're not supposed to and lose games that they should blow the teams out. So until they can turn around and become a consistent team week in and week out, they deserve to be where they are at 18, 19 in the coaches poll. When you look at Mississippi State, they're a hot team. They have a lot of starters back on offense and defense. Tyler Russell is gone. Dak Prescott now takes over. I've heard a lot of people and analysts and NFL scouts love Dak Prescott. They have a chance to make a run, but they have a very tough schedule. Their game against LSU, Mississippi State will sort of make or break their season. If they could score the upset against LSU, it could be a magical season for the Bulldogs. Dan Mullen doing a great job. Both coaches doing a great job, Hugh Freeze and Dan Mullen, bringing football back to the state of Mississippi. I think it's both teams do those. Struggle with consistency. You look at Mississippi State, they almost pulled that game out against Auburn on the Plains. If they could have gotten that victory, could have been a little bit of a different type of season for Mississippi State. Instead, Auburn wins and they make the run to the national championship. We could see that in both of these teams, but I think they are where they should be. Until they show more consistency, both teams are right where they should be, but they can make a run. They're very good talent on both sides of the ball.
Joe, anytime I see a preseason top 25, I wonder, is that particular voter voting who they think are truly the number 1, 2 through 25 top teams in the country? Like number 1 is the best, number 2 is the second best, or are they looking at schedules and trying to project, well, this is really like the number 5 team in the country. They're like the 5th best team, but their schedule's brutal, so I'm going to rank them like 13 because I don't think they're going to win all these games. That's what I always question about these preseason polls.
I agree. We have to do them because people love reading about them. It creates controversy, and that's what college football is all about. When I make my poll, I look at who's going to be standing at the end of the year. What are the top 25 teams that are going to be there come bowl time, come the playoffs? So that's why when I look at it, I take a different type of approach. I look at it to really play out the season, so to speak, not just based off of last year and because Florida State won, they deserve to be one this year. No, I look at it in a different way, schedule, and who can challenge them in terms of their schedule and the players that they have coming back. So I do it a little bit differently, but other people, I think, do it the same way. Like, these are 25 best teams, or they just look at who they have coming back. So it's what makes college football, though, so special, isn't it?
No doubt about that. It serves for debate. There's no doubt about that. Texas A&M, if you line up the two arguments I just made about how these people vote, I think that Texas A&M could drop out of the poll. Now, they may prove me wrong, but the defense was atrocious last year. Kevin Sumlin's recruited to the point where we expect that to improve, no question about that. But a true freshman, possibly a quarterback, maybe they go with Kenny Hill, who's a sophomore. Minus Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans, your thoughts about A&M?
I don't have them in my top 25. They start the year on the road against South Carolina. Going to be a very difficult ball game. Playing South Carolina. South Carolina has won every opener over, I think, the last 13 years to start the season. So not an easy task for the Aggies. But when you look at the talent that they did lose, Manziel, Mike Evans, and even Ben Molina, the running back, three big pieces of the puzzle on offense, new quarterback coming in place. I'm not sold on A&M right now. Their defense, very suspect, not only against the run, but against the pass. And until they step up and have a dominant victory defensively, in my opinion, I think they're a middle-of-the-road team in the SEC this year. I don't see them in the top 25 at all.
What may play in their favor, though, Joe, is if you look at the non-conference schedule, they don't play anybody. So if they go 4-4 and they're an average team in the SEC, they get the 4 non-conference wins. They're 8-4, and being an SEC team, they probably get the nod in the top, bottom 5 of the top 25.
Right.
Let me group this last 4 or 5 for you,
Sure.
and you can just chime in with whatever you've got with Kansas State. Bill Snyder, it's amazing. You talk about recruiting or lack thereof, but being able to field a competitive football team, he's amazing. Nebraska, North Carolina, who always produces top-level talent to go to the NFL, but for whatever reason can't win a lot of games at the college level. Then you got Texas and Washington to round out the top 25.
Well, when you look at these teams, I'll start at the bottom. Washington, Chris Peterson taking over for Sarkisian. I don't have Washington in the top 25. They lose Keith Price, their quarterback, Bishop Sankey, their starting running back, going to be very difficult to replace with a new coach and a new system. I don't care that Chris Peterson was an offensive whiz at Boise State. Still going to take some time. I know they have a solid defense. I think Washington's more in the area of like 35, 36, so I don't think Washington should be there. Charlie Strong, great head coach. I think he's the right guy for the job at Texas, but a ton of suspensions, the inconsistency at the quarterback position with David Ash, and you got to give Charlie Strong some time to get his guys in there. What he was able to do at Louisville, a very, very solid and underrated job. The talent that he did bring in cannot be argued. So, but in my opinion, I don't think Texas is in the top 25 either. I think they're a little bit overinflated because they are Texas. But I think Charlie Strong is the right guy for the job, but a major hits in terms of suspensions and the inconsistency at quarterback has me worried if you're a Texas Longhorn fan. When you look at North Carolina, very, very solid talent. Larry Fedora, great job. Bryn Renner, who started the season at quarterback, gave way to Williams, the quarterback, more of a mobile style quarterback that fits Fedora's system. And then when you look at Switzer, the wide receiver punt returner, he's an unbelievable, just an unbelievable home run hitter that gives North Carolina solid offensive talent. Very, very weak, though, in my opinion, ACC. Outside, you mentioned it, Florida State and Clemson, top two teams, is a major drop-off. I'll throw one other team in the ACC that should be in there. In my opinion, it's Louisville. I know they're going with a new quarterback, but I think Louisville should be in there because of the offensive talent that they do have. Devontae Parker, Eli Rogers, Dominique Brown, and Michael Dyer, the former Auburn Tiger standout. Going to be a lot of offensive talent that Charlie Strong left Bobby Petrino. So that's another team that can sort of create some upsets in the ACC this year. But I don't like North Carolina in the top 25 until they can prove it. Body of work. They were 7-6 last year. I'm not so sure. I think they're down in the area of 35, 36 as well, maybe 40. They seem to win games that they're not supposed to, and then they struggle mid through the season. So until they can show some more consistency, I think they deserve to be out of the top 25. The other two teams that you mentioned, just refresh my memory. What were the other two to start?
Well, we got Kansas State, we got Nebraska.
Yeah, Kansas State, they have one tough game, and he's done a great job, Bill Snyder. Bill Snyder's done a great job. They have a game against Auburn that's a Thursday night game that's going to make or break their season. Waters, the quarterback, he's very good. But in my opinion, they need to win that game against Auburn to really make some noise in the Big 12. Can they do it? Auburn's got a bye week before that game. I think what they were able to do against Michigan last year, physically on the offense and defensive side of the ball, another solid coaching job by Bill Snyder. I guess, in my opinion, I think they're a little high where they should be. I think I would have them outside the top 25 as well, but I think it's based off of last year's performance against Michigan in the bowl game. But we'll see how it plays out against Auburn. Nebraska, this is the team that really, when you look at them, the team that befuddles everybody, because Bo Pelini came to Nebraska as a defensive-minded coach, and I've talked to a number of Cornhuskers that want to know where has the defense been. Ron Kellogg got that amazing victory at home against Northwestern, which sort of really spurned that victory and made a run. A swing game last year was that game against Michigan. In my opinion, if they would have lost that game, I think Bo Pelini would have been out as head coach, but it was a gutty effort by Tommy Armstrong, the quarterback. They won that victory in Ann Arbor, and then the Gator Bowl really secured him coming into this season. Can Nebraska make some noise? They really have to shore up the defensive side of the ball. I think they deserve the ranking in 22. But he's another head coach that hasn't shown consistency on the defensive side of the ball, and he's a defensive-minded coach. Until he can show that, I don't understand what the problem is. Nick Gregory, the defensive end, is a solid player and really came on towards the end of last season. He loses some defensive talent in the secondary at the cornerback position and safety positions. But is the Big Ten that strong as a whole that really going to challenge Nebraska? I'm not so sure about that from top to bottom outside the top three. But we'll see. I think Nebraska could really make some noise, but again, their defense has to step up, Mark.
Well, I think the Big Ten's pretty good, but again, it comes down to scheduling. Nebraska's not going to see Ohio State. They're not going to see a number of the top teams in the other division. Iowa's decent. Really, that Wisconsin game might decide the division and move on to the Big Ten championship game. But like you, I thought when Nebraska joined the Big Ten, I thought, wow, they've been a dominant defensive team. Just think about Colt McCoy and Texas scoring 45 and 50 points, and then they hit Nebraska in the Big 12 championship game. They had that phantom 1-second throw out of bounds and kicked the field goal, but they put 13 points on the board against Nebraska. Was shut down the last couple of years in the Big 12, and they just flipped the script when they came to the Big Ten. Man, Wisconsin putting 70 on them, Ohio State 63.
Right.
But on the other side of the ball, they found an offense with Taylor Martinez and Kenny Bell and Abdullah, an exceptional back. So they've got some weapons on offense. Can Tommy Armstrong make the plays and get it into the hands of his playmakers? Because I think Bell's exceptional, and so is certainly Amir Abdullah for Nebraska. Joe, I got a list of teams here, and maybe I'm missing somebody, but if you have a dark horse outside the top 25, and a who's who of college football in a few spots here when you talk Florida, Penn State, Michigan, Missouri, Iowa, Mississippi State, Miami, Oklahoma State, Louisville, you mentioned, BYU, and Central Florida. And I'll put in a little plug. We interviewed George O'Leary just a few days ago in Central Florida coming off that magical 12-1 campaign.
You want to know out of those teams who I like? I like BYU.
Or anybody else?
I like Louisville. I think they'll have a solid season because of what Charlie Strong left in the cupboard offensively, and he's got some defensive talent that he has there at Louisville. So I think Bobby Petrino will have a solid season in his first year as head coach. So I think they can make some noise in the ACC. I have them at number 17 in my top 25. I always like this team, and it's because of the style of defense that they play, and they always play a tough schedule. BYU. Taysom Hill, very, very underrated quarterback for BYU. Not your prototypical drop-back passer. He makes plays with his legs. He rushed over for 200 yards, set our BYU record. So he's a very gutty quarterback, and they always have a solid defensive line that's very good in run support. As long as you have that and you're able to run the football, you have a chance to win some ball games, and if the schedule lines up, could be a magical season. Taysom Hill, he's going to be a great NFL quarterback, in my opinion, because he can make plays with his arms and legs. So those are the two teams that I have in my top 25 that I think if the chips fall right, they can make some noise in the ACC and in the playoff. BYU is a team that can do it.
Iowa, I don't think is exceptional, but at the same time, they bring back the quarterback and they lose the three really good linebackers they have. The thing that's going for them again is they're probably better than the first 10 teams on their schedule. They don't play anybody from the Eastern Division in the Big Ten. Again, that gets me. No Michigan State, no Michigan, no Ohio State, Iowa. So they've got Nebraska and Wisconsin to finish the season, and it's going to come down, I would think, to those games in deciding who moves on to the Big Ten championship game for Iowa. We've got Joe Lisi with us from GoForThe2.com. Hey, Joe, what can we look out for you in regards to some of your content creation at this point?
They could follow me on GoForThe2.com. They could follow me at Twitter at GoForThe2. Also on VenuingLive.com. It's a brand new application that allows fans to communicate about their favorite sport. They could check that out at Venuing Live at the App Store. Download it at VenuingLive.com. I'll be on on all season long. Also, I host a weekly podcast with former Georgia Bulldog wide receiver Corey Allen called the NCAA Weekly Blitz on BlogTalkRadio.com.
Hey, Joe, if somebody out there just wanted to get ready for college football and they really weren't into it until now, I think this was a great overview of the top teams in the country and just to get that snapshot of the national scene. So we appreciate it. It was good stuff, Joe.
I enjoyed it. I love to talk again. Anytime we talk college football is fine by me, Mark.
Sounds good, Joe.